So I think we'll start now. So I'm Linda Mall, founder of Accountability by Design, igniting conversations that matter, and Readers of the Pack, a community for leaders who are readers. I'm joined today by my co-host for this series, Laura Haynes, Chief Cheerleader, Emerging Leader Mentor. A warm welcome to those leaders who could join us today as we have rescheduled this call. You are invited to share where you're from and what you do in the chat to connect with others on the call. We're a small group, but as it seems some leaders are off doing lunch somewhere with someone other than us. We are recording, so that video will be available to you and to Eric and to others who check out our website. We ask you to save your questions until the last 15 minutes of our time together today, so that, or you can put them in the chat at any time and Laura or I will pick them up. We love to see your smiles, so if you're comfortable leaving your camera on, that's great. There's something about seeing the whites of your eyes that make this even more enjoyable than normal. And our special guest today, Eric Stone, is author of Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture, a roadmap for igniting high performance. He's an international keynote speaker, award-winning author, founder and CEO of ClearPath Ventures, and an amazing human. So welcome, Eric. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me on. I can't wait to have a good discussion all about workplace culture.
Lovely, lovely. So I I'm going to start with just saying this book is full of great strategies and information. I love the read. My own Kindle copy has got highlights and notes, and it had a lot of relevance for me in my coaching practice. So I really appreciated it. And so I think that the first question I have for you is, writing a book is a huge challenge. And you, in our pre-conversation today, you were saying certainly more of a challenge than you expected on some days. So why this book and why now?
Yeah, great question. Well, I never thought I'd write a book. That's the truth of it. And I remember through my corporate journey, I would always hear a question that said, "Hey, Eric, what are you guys doing within your team to create that special sauce? Whether it was service or
Mm.
sales, what are you guys doing?" And it always resonated with me. And we were fortunate, I was fortunate to be part of a team that led Southern New England and was considered one of the top performers in a balance analysis approach. So when you look at all the big important items that you're trying to push and drive, we were fortunate to be in the top tier for not just a year, but for a decade. And I felt that we weren't doing anything extraordinary. I just think we were doing the ordinary extraordinary. And there were some principles that I felt would be fun to share. That gave me a little nudge. The second was a comment my dad made. He was a textile salesman, and I was probably 30 years old, and he said, "Eric, God could not have put me on this earth just to be a textile salesman." And so that comment in my 30s resonated for me to say, you know what, after 26 plus years with an amazing company like Enterprise, I think I want to try to impact more. So instead of maybe a few hundred employees, maybe I can impact 10,000, 100,000 people with this message. And the timing was just honestly, it was lucky in the sense, not lucky that there's a pandemic, but it put culture front and center. And I always felt it was a misunderstood topic. I felt it was all about the wrong things. I felt people thought it was hugs and high fives and rousing speeches. And while that's a piece of it, it's certainly not what workplace culture is all about. It's a piece of it. And I felt it was the catalyst to execution. I come up with a little bit of an outline. I put pen to paper a little bit more. I interview some individuals who led large organizations to see if my principles would resonate.
Ah,
And next thing you know, Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture comes out.
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. And Laura, are you ready to ask the next question?
I am. I am. Thank you, Linda. In your book, Eric, early on, you share keys to your success, which is sometimes hard to pinpoint, I think. But would you be able to share those practices that you've alluded to, and the practical key criteria to designing that high performance culture? I find it to be elusive when I'm having conversations with people to pinpoint what that looks like from a practical perspective.
I think I got the perfect thing for you here. I didn't come up with it. I wish I could give credit to who did, in a sense of these 5 factors of an employee engagement. And so when I looked, and all the research from the Gallups of the world say, if you can have really strong engagement, it leads to really strong business outcomes. And Gallup would look at the top quartile of organizations they would look at and compare them to the bottom quartile. And what was the difference? And those in the top quartile of employee engagement had a 10% increase in customer service and loyalty. They had a 18% increase in profitability, I should say sales productivity, a 23% increase in profitability, 81% reduction in absenteeism, and a whole bunch of others. And so, well, why not put my chips in on these engagement factors? And so that was my philosophy that I brought into the team that I really feel was influential. The first factor, what are you doing within your organization to encourage a strong relationship with management, with the manager? The number one reason people leave their organization is a dissatisfaction with their immediate supervisor, and their immediate supervisor, believe it or not, has a bigger impact on their health care than their primary care physician. So it matters. But the big thing is, under a strong relationship through the interview process and onboarding and initiatives that you have within your team or organization, what are those 2 or 3 things that you are going to really, really follow and execute? The second was a clear communication of expectations and goals. What are some of those things that you're going to get to every layer of the employee base? From, in our case, the person who just comes entry level all the way up to the senior leaders. What are those things that we used to do, the ABCs of communication? What will you amplify? What message? What will you buffer? And then what will you convey? And those are really critical with clearly communicating your goals and expectations. And believe it or not, I think the stat is less than 60% of people are aware of what they're supposed to be doing, which is really frightening.
Hmm.
Think about it.
Mhm.
The third was right material and equipment in order to achieve the desired outcome. And this goes into 2 really important things. One is burnout, one is bore out. These 2 terms that you'll hear a lot of. And are we encouraging them, instead of just saying, Linda, you're the VP of sales, get the job done? That doesn't always resonate. It doesn't really work. How about, what are some things you might be able to supply your team in order to achieve the desired outcome? And again, for every initiative, what are those things you're going to tuck into every part of your organization? The fourth practical principle would be, what are you doing to encourage personal and professional growth? So what are you going to do to unlock people's potentially? So our initiatives that we would always come up with were not just some principle we wanted you to do within the workplace. If it was time management, we wanted you to do it in the workplace, but we also wanted you to practice it at home. And then the last one was, what do you do to recognize effort and reward excellence? Kind of rewarding those top performers. And again, what are those things within your organization that you do? Those are 5 practical things that you can do throughout your team or organization to encourage elite engagement that will normally lead to really strong business outcomes. So if there was one simple approach, that probably would be the first one I'd recommend.
Mhm.
Excellent. Very good. Is there different guidance or an adjusted piece of guidance you would give from a hybrid perspective? Um, Leaders in today's business world and employees, obviously, we're dealing with a very different business environment. And so, have you thought about that from that perspective? I'm sure you have.
I have, and matter of fact, I was recently on a podcast just about how do you
Ah,
build workplace culture within a hybrid or remote environment. And I would clearly say that there has to be more touch points and more intentionality. But what I like about those 5 factors is when you think about a relationship, whether you're in person, remote, or hybrid, you're going to have to find settings in order, whether it's the interview process, whether it's the onboarding, there's still similar things that you'll have to follow. What the workspace looks like, what do you encourage as a leader to? It's really hard. I mean, I'm in a bedroom right now because my daughter's working from home, and so you have these confined spaces. And while it's really great that I don't have a commute right now, you do have to have these boundaries. So they're just a little different, but I would look at your 5 factors. They cross generational perspectives. So, well, what does Gen Z want? My daughter being Gen Z, most of my nieces and nephews, Gen Z. Well, a relationship might be a little bit different than an Xer like myself, but you still have to understand what do we need to do to create that relationship. So it's definitely different, but I use the same principles to achieve engagement.
So great. We were just having a conversation about the multi-generational impact in the workforce today as part of a presentation that we were doing. So it's just so good to hear you say that. And I'm going to check out that podcast and we'll share it with our viewers and our registrants. The next question I have for you is you use the analogy of a road trip in your book with 9 steps. So can you highlight bumper stickers, key messages from each chapter that our audience today would find, engaging and something that they could potentially apply in their own work world or, even from a personal perspective?
Absolutely. And so for everyone on the virtual call here, the metaphor of the book is a road trip. So it's a journey, and everything was really tied into that. And so throughout the book, there are little bumper stickers that you might have on a car, or what's in the rear view mirror when you'd reflect at the end of a chapter. And so I am big on making it simple and have it resonate, and storytelling and the metaphor was something that we did. I would say I'm going to try to pick a few verse every because I don't want to get too spread out. But it even goes, for example, there's a hiring. So when you travel, who are you going to bring with you on your road trip? You got to choose your passengers carefully. And that goes into the hiring process. And so there would be some really important things that I felt would help. Not only you have to learn and teach your team how to interview, because we all have our own biases that can happen. And so step 1, do the people who are doing the interview understand the importance of clarifying questions and the halo and horn effect, where you can sometimes get stuck to the person like me who's a Red Sox fan, and all of a sudden I think Linda's the best applicant ever because she likes the Red Sox. And so there are some principles that on the hiring, and then some key questions that I always said, how do we get the typical versus the optimal? So if my daughter's to interview, my nieces and nephews, sons, or however to interview, they're bringing their A game. And I wanted to try to pull them back. I wanted to make them feel comfortable. And how within an interview setting do you make someone feel comfortable, you become approachable, but you have very calculated questions? And some of those questions were as simple as well, tell me your story. So, Laura, tell me your story without me provoking what I would want to talk about. And all the things that in sales, for example, maybe I want someone very persuasive. I don't want to give the interview away. And I want to see if naturally you're going to start talking about that. I loved asking, what does work-life balance mean or career-life integration mean to you, especially with generational differences? We all have different impressions, things that have really transformed who you are today. What's the event? Tell me about a time you worked really hard at something to achieve it, because then we all are on the common ground of, if you're going to be special, you might not just be able to work 4 hours a day. Maybe you can. I couldn't. So it was really thoughtful questions. And so hiring to match your culture versus what many people say fit. And so for me, the analogy would be, if I had a tie, the tie is that match. It makes my shirt, everything seems to come out. It matches things, diversity of thought, generation, all these things come out. Where if I'm looking for a shoe and I'm a size 8, I'm only going to get a size 8. That's size 8. It doesn't make it much better. And so there goes into a lot of things about the hiring process. A lot of people wanted to know about, how do I scale? Well, how do I scale my 10 people? I want to go to 20. I'm 200. We're now going to go to 400. And there's a chapter that talks about creating culture carriers. So creating people within your organization that will really act as the voice, because most people listened to my team over me at times. When my team would reinforce an initiative, it was more important than me saying the initiative. And so we had something called the think tank. And the think tank was a bunch of managers who were assigned by their peers, would meet with me every other month. And some of our best brainstorming visionary things came from something like that. So there's the hiring, there's the scaling, there was the distraction catcher, clear the way, the road obstacles as you're on this road trip. And what I find is a lot of organizations seemingly add. When you look at a legal document, what do you see? It's 22 pages of, I can't even understand it usually. I have someone else read it. I don't get it. And so it was really this addition by subtraction approach. For example, we took our promotional guidelines and it was just too complicated. Nobody knew where they stood. Nobody knew when they were able to get into put in for an opportunity. And we took a look at that promotional process, addition by subtraction. We removed some things to make sure that everyone would gain awareness, because if you remember the second factor, clear communication of expectations and goals, we wanted everything to be in alignment. And that was really what I think made things that would stick. Those are just a few of the nuggets that you'll get. The last chapter, I think, is helpful because it says, well, can you measure culture? How do you measure culture? And so through my years of interviewing people who have done it even longer than I have, and looking at really successful organizations, I came up with this 6-point inspection, again, car-related theme, of what are those things that I would encourage you to really look at to at least get a baseline of what the health of your organization is. The two most important, from my opinion, were the engagement of your team and the customer's experience, or the net promoter score. Those were double weighted in my calculation. And so it was a little bit of everything I hope people would want to know, I hope. And those are a few of the things that would be on that bumper sticker or rearview mirror.
Oh, it's so great. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback.
I think it comes back to our original conversation before everyone came online today around that consistency. So often we listen to a speaker or we read a book and we take one nugget and we implement it. But really, it's a process. There's a foundational piece and then you build on it consistently. And that's the power of reading through the whole book, I guess, if I was marketing your book. But I think it is the power of really taking a deeper dive. And I know there's a couple of people on this call who are doing this work. Aaron, Heather, Melanie, to some degree, who are doing this work and probably will have some great questions for us as we pursue this. Looking forward to it. Is there one step leaders miss or move through too fast more often than not?
In my opinion, I recently did a quick little video, and it started with why meetings seemingly are so unpopular. And I posed a question and said, why do most meetings fail? And Linda, it goes to the question of, to me, organizations miss the rollout. And let me share an example of what I mean by rolling out an initiative. I was talking to someone who I was working with and coaching them on a recent initiative on empathy. So this big company comes up with a beautiful acronym for empathy. And what they did is they sent all of this training material to the leaders of specific units, and they said, here you go. And I think that, empathy, I think the acronym was EAR. I think it was EAR, which is perfect, right? Actively listening and empathetic and vicariously. I haven't been exposed to the situation, but I'm going to live it through you, which is a little bit different than sympathy. And so I said, wow, this is really good. Do you mind if I read it? And so I start reading it. Great information. And they said, well, how do you how does the company know this is getting to everybody? What is the measure to ensure that empathy is truly important through the lifeline of the employee? And that's where it broke down. It was, well, no, they gave us this, and we're going to tell our team, and it ended. And that's an exaggerated story of, I think people miss the rollout. Um, the key is, and look at your 5 factors of engagement. That was written in our conference room. It was in our conference room for every single meeting and training class people would view it. In the first 3 months, they were told about these 5 factors due to the impact of how it relates to outcomes, but it's the right thing to do, more importantly. And so for a written exam, they'd have to know the 5 factors. At about the 9-month mark, there'd be another test, but this would be more of a one-on-one oral kind of examination, in a sense, between 2 district managers and yourself. And you would have to also not only know the 5 factors, you'd have to explain how each one of them, how you demonstrate it. Well, then you'd go for an interview for an opportunity. And one of the questions every single time was, how have you demonstrated the 5 factors? It is taking an initiative and finding ways to make it ubiquitous, where no matter where you look, it's hard to not know what's going on.
And that consistency is really tough. Like that, yeah, I bet you that's where many projects fall down, is that we start with such vigor and
Yeah.
commitment, and then we lose it along the way, right?
Well,
It's
because I told you about it, Linda, right? We've talked about it. I told you, and I
exactly,
mean,
exactly. Why don't
and
you remember?
there's a powerful, I'm going to butcher this stat, but I think it was about, after a meeting, a week after the meeting, 90% of the information is forgotten. And of the 10% that's remembered, half of it's wrong. And it's
Mhm,
just so powerful of
mhm.
why people get frustrated and why it's exhausting building a high performance culture, because you're constantly talking about this stuff.
Yeah, that is why I went to coaching. So in my previous life, when I owned a bigger company, I delivered Wilson Learning, programming, leadership training, and Achieve Global leadership training. But I would go back to an organization 2 or 3 years later to do the next session, and they would not be using what we did the first one, right? And it just became for me an ethical decision because they were wasting their money
Yeah.
on me. I mean, I just couldn't fathom how you could keep throwing that money out the door. And so I started researching. So how do we make this stick? And coaching was the thing that
Yeah.
actually supported that. And so when I listen to those stats, I know them to be true. I lived it. Yeah.
Well, another example is, we used to have periodic contests, and shame on me, because I would then go into the field and visit the brick and mortar stores, and I'm all excited because we have this cool contest going on.
Mhm.
And I'd say, hey, Heather, tell me about the contest. And it would be crickets, until we understood the importance of everything we're talking about. And we used to do it, we called it a bit of a quiz. And I would have my executive assistant, anytime we ran a contest, would quote unquote phone shop, I guess you'd say, the brick and mortar stores. They'd
Oh,
get random people on. The only way you could get eliminated from the contest, and we were a little flexible because we wanted everyone to remain in, but was if you didn't know the contest. Now, you could have it posted near your workstation. It didn't matter. We just needed you to be able to point out the 2 or 3 things that we're really focusing on. And we
mm,
called it a little bit of a quiz. We needed checks and balances to ensure that people really were,
mhm.
we wanted to sell the stuff that we're really giving. There was
Yep.
a reward here. So, and that's one of the factors, the fifth one.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah. And we're still learning that. We're still all a work in progress, right? So when you're working with organizations, where do you find the hesitancy or pushback when you're doing a project like this? Where does
I'd
it
almost go into my
go?
own experience of, I've taken over a few different places, but in the coaching and consulting world too, um, it's harder here. There's just challenges here that, or we've never been able to, it's not going to work here. it's not going to work here because
Mindset.
yeah, and that fascinates me because you nailed it. It is what has happened within this organization that has made us so resistant to somebody coming in and trying to provide. It would be like a personal trainer coming in
Yeah.
and you're saying, no, it just doesn't work here. And so I think there's just and change in general obviously can be a
Mm-hmm.
challenge,
Mm-hmm.
but my biggest one was I just did a speaking engagement in Trinidad, and I happened to have and I don't want to say who because it was a pretty big company, and I'm sitting down with someone who recently took a big leadership role and spent some time with him while I was there. And the first thing, and this person was all over the States and now was brought over, and there are cultural differences. There's no doubt about it. But the first thing was they don't get it here. And I'm like, well, maybe, but I don't know if I'd come to that yet, you know. So that would be the thing that stands out for me. And I'm sure there's a variety of other things.
Yeah, it's just mindset. I think it's that mindset. Yeah. Where does that mindset culture come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think I'm going to open it up to the floor and invite questions. If you have questions and just can put your hand up, hopefully we'll see you. And if you put your hand up and we don't, then yell at us or just ask the question.
Erin has a question.
Okay, great. Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm really excited that we get to ask questions. Normally in some of these, you're kind of behind the scenes, just listening to the panel. So appreciate the forum. Eric, really appreciate everything you've shared so far. I know one of the challenges I faced is often capacity within the organization to absorb the change, integrate it, and apply the practices that we're offering up as solutions and recommendations. So I'm curious how in your organization, and if you talk about this in the book, around what did you as a leader and as a team and as an organization have to say no to in order to create the space to do things differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll try to run an exercise that created buy-in that allowed us to have a yes mentality to the things that we really wanted to include. Um, and so because you said the biggest, well, there's two big things I always witnessed with my management team, and it was time management. So I don't have enough time to, and holding someone accountable or having a difficult conversation to the client, the customer, the board member, to whoever it was. And and so what can we do? Because what we were doing, Aaron, is we were continuing to put a lot on their plate, but we felt by giving them the right material, equipment, and information in order to achieve the desired outcome, number three of the factor, that we were allowing them the ability to. And so what I ended up needing to do, because no one was still buying, was we did something called schedule with precision to allow us to have a little bit more, can we get them to say yes more or myself to say yes? And we took all our initiatives and we literally took a typical work week. And we said, okay, if we're here for 52 hours and we're telling you you need to market for 20 and you need to do one-on-ones for 10 and you need to run your peak operations for 15 and the administrative things. And so we ended up really digging into something called schedule with precision. What we identified were some alarming things. We did have the time. They agreed we had the time. We were scheduling our employees during the wrong time, which was not allowing us to embrace the initiatives, maybe saying no to some of the things that we might have been capable of. The other thing as a leader was to say, Aaron, you're right. We should not be doing this anymore. You know, and that was the group, the think tank I referenced, where there were some initiatives that were getting a little stale. And I, as the leader, had to say, thank you for sharing. I think you're right. And hence goes into the ABCs. So this was the buffer. How do we use this first principle thinking? Elon Musk talks about it all the time of, you know, going from A to Z, maybe differently and buffering the stuff. And so by being mindful, it's amazing what happens when you take something off someone's plate, especially when it's unnecessary, what you're able to say yes to. And so that's something, at least from a large scale of bringing in 50 plus managers together with their district managers, all holding hands on what are some of the struggles and challenges that aren't allowing us to do some of the things. And that was a little bit about the ABCs of an addition by subtraction to get the buy-in of. Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Aaron, and I'm going to do some scheduling and precision in the next week at this end. Yeah. Anybody else with a question?
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Awesome.
It kind of feeds off the last one. So you're getting the buy-in. One of the struggles I've had is actually connecting with the decision maker. I spend a lot of time liaising with HR and building rapport with them, and even occupational health and safety, because my specialty is around psychological health and safety, which in Canada falls under that umbrella. But I can't always connect with the decision maker, and sometimes that is a barrier. So do you have any wisdom to share with that, please?
Yeah, can always be a challenge. I'll use the analogy of in the industry I was in for a long time. We would sometimes miss the mark because, interestingly enough, the decision maker isn't always the CEO necessarily. For example, in our industry, I was with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which became Enterprise Holdings, Enterprise. We rented cars, and when you need a replacement, usually we would hope they would call us. And so whether it was corporate business, replacement business, retail, leisure business, and we would sometimes go into these facilities and we were identifying the wrong person to reach out to, because sometimes, believe it or not, the person who would refer us the business, which is what we had to uncover, who is the person who's going to say, yes, we embrace Ruth Ann and the initiatives. Sometimes it was the receptionist who was the person who was always on the phones. And even though there might have been someone who was pushing another direction, we developed such a strong relationship with the front desk, with that person, and we got the customer out of their way so quickly, it just became easier to use us. But it was one of our exercises that we had to do, is for every one of our A, B, and C accounts, do we truly have the right decision maker? And I hate to make it as easy as this, but it would literally be, when you guys make a decision to choose a rental car company, who are the three people that would be important in that decision? And so for us on the environment I was in, and I don't know if that answers the question, but we had an initiative to target exactly that, because sometimes we felt we had the person only to find out we had the wrong person. And the importance of the three was sometimes, Ruth Ann, that they leave. The decision maker leaves, and you need people that still are going to go to support and bring you into the door. And so those are some, and I know that might be too simplified, but it was just an initiative we did. Do we have the right people that we're trying to get a hold of? And sometimes it was just as, who are those three important people that will help support this major initiative that you're willing to invest in?
Yeah, and it always does tie back to that relationship piece, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's sales principle number one. And in our business, I think the second principle is, who are the influencers as well, so that you're playing both, because sometimes you miscalculate who the real decision maker is. I remember working with a sales team, and they sold, it was agricultural products. And the one salesman told the story of selling to a Hutterite colony, and how actually it was the wife who made the decision, not the husband who he was working with. So
Yeah.
she was the influencer, right? Now that's a very small organization, but that happens in big organizations as well, right?
Well, Linda and Laura, you're both familiar with the United Way. And so I was
Yeah.
also on the board of the United Way. And it was really important we had the right decision makers within workplace campaigns, which were really
Yeah.
important to support. And there's sometimes I think they call them the employee campaign, the ECMs, or the employee campaign manager. And
Yeah.
sometimes that person was every bit as influential as the CEO of the organization. And building those relationships were so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
And and Laura is queen of sales, so yeah, she knows the power of knowing the right decision maker.
I think it's about relationships. And Ruth Ann, that was a great question. And just for lack of a better term, the one up, one down approach, Eric, from a relationship perspective. And don't make assumptions about who's actually influencing that organization. It's especially with big decisions, right? Because it becomes a change management piece too, and it's a shift. So lots of work to be done.
Yeah, we called it the, how are you truly the indispensable business partner? And so
Right.
we ended up using the United Way to give them some more press, that anybody can do what we were doing. And in a lot of the businesses we're in, anyone can do it. You're not, you're not the only one. And so what
Yeah.
makes you unique outside of a great service you're providing? And so building relationships and giving back to the communities that were important to all our major partners, and doing a backpack for kids or doing some sort of initiative made us indispensable. So when we did fall short and the decision maker was very frustrated, the relationship was so strong because of the other things that we were doing. We had our own little competitive advantage.
So we're getting very close to the end. We have time for one more question and then for Laura to wrap it up. Is there another question sitting in the group? Unusual. Okay,
I
Aaron.
actually have a quick one here. Just
Oh, okay,
yeah, we talk about
Sebastian.
we're talking about change management. It's coming up quite often. So, what are some of the things that you would hone in on when you're managing change? Things that resonate, maybe some key principles that you can share.
Yeah, I used my group when we had to make a major decision. My think tank was something that I would bounce off of, because I didn't want to I didn't want to be 30,000 feet above, and I needed these. And we had up to 8 people who were on this, team, I guess you'd call it. And that allowed me, for when we were going to be making a change, to get the ground level of what is the ramifications, and let's think through all of these things. No different than a lot of companies would do. But when I made change, it was bringing that group up. If we were making a change, it might have been on a policy that someone within the organization created. And so we would also have a way to communicate that the person who worked really hard to create maybe this policy or procedure that we were going to change directions in did need to hear from us on why we were making the change. And so the bigger thing was surrounding with the right people, and then understanding that it's exhausting, and how with this change will you thread the needle through every single layer so they understand the why. Sebastian, you would be amazed at, we would do a pay raise, which you would think would be an amazing, not even, that's a good change. But if we didn't get each group settings together and bring them up versus some mass email, the message got very muddied. All of a sudden it's, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting after taxes of $2,000. Yeah, they're just doing it because, and so anything we would do, I would use my think tank. We would brainstorm, certainly my regional manager and other senior leaders, because I wanted them to point out, what am I missing? That was the whole thing. What am I going to potentially miss here? And then and you'll see over, God, is it, okay, it's this way. I would suggest, this is the hourglass approach, Sebastian. And it's within the book. It's a principle, technically, that would be culture building and change building. And I don't know if we'll have enough time to go over it, but it is a process of, how do you, if you think of an hourglass, it's hour, O-U-R, not I, like an eyeglass. And so it's bringing everyone together when making those decisions. And as the hourglass bows out, so first you're pulling information from everybody. That's the listen, observe, and learn phase of this change. Stakeholders, board members, whoever it is says something's wrong. You're pulling and listening, observing, and learning. And as the hourglass bows out, you start to orchestrate what you're hearing to become the blueprint, the plan. And as it bows out, it's now clarity, right where the sand goes through. Are the 3 to 5 or this change we're making? How do we roll it out? How do we train and now roll it out as the hourglass goes out? And when the sand hits, how do we assess this change? 2 guiding principles on an hourglass: mission, vision, values, policies, procedures. Are we making our decisions that are in alignment with that? And there's just another little approach using the hourglass when making change.
That's great. Thanks, Eric.
You bet.
Great question. Love that question and the answer. When are you coming to Canada, Eric?
Whenever needed. My brother-in-law's, he used to live in Thunder Bay, so I'm
Oh, come west, young man.
yeah. I guess it's the hockey capital of the world of Thunder Bay itself, per capita, I guess.
Oh, really?
So I grew up around Thunder Bay, so I know Thunder Bay very well. As a teenager, I lived in a mining community and I used to go with my friends to Thunder Bay to spend weekends partying. Yeah. I knew Thunder Bay. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing. So I have one more question for you, Eric.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to in 2025, if you can believe it? It's 2025 around the corner, in your own business.
Yeah.
And what's to come for you? What's on the horizon?
Good question. I think for me, I would love, and I think Linda, you mentioned you've been to 7 countries. I'd love to somehow speak in 7 continents. I would love to expand my speaking to, I don't think I'll achieve it by next year, but I think I could knock off a couple others. That would be really fun. To continue to spread the word of what I think is this big leadership gap and a leadership opportunity within corporate America. And
Nice.
then what would be really fun, and I am trying hard. So I'm a diehard sports fan, which also brings in leadership because there's the coaching aspect. And I'm a diehard Boston Celtics, Boston Red Sox, New England Patriots. And so I am trying to get within the organizations to potentially have an agreement or an arrangement where I could assist internally building something special, just like they do on the court or on the field. I want to do that within those places I'm very passionate about. So that'd be really fun.
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
great. Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to be following you along your journey for sure.
So, as we close today, we first want to thank Eric for the precious time and the wisdom he so freely shared with us today. If you haven't read the book already, we invite you to order Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture, a roadmap for igniting high performance. If you've enjoyed the conversation today, we invite you to watch our website, readersofthepack.com, for upcoming interviews and other events. We'll be making those changes probably end of this coming week, beginning of next week. We're just booking speakers into the new year now, and we have a special event coming for the month of December that will last for 12 days, 12 inspiring moments. If you learn through conversation with this, our leadership learning labs are just a take on the old-fashioned book club, and bring internal teams into conversation to talk about what matters most, your book of choice. And I just invite you to start each day with a hopeful heart, a curious spirit, and the courage of a lion. Know that we will share this recording with you all. We so appreciate the conversation, the questions, and appreciate you, Eric, and I appreciate Laura. So thank you for joining us, and we're now signing off for our Authors Speak series with Eric D. Stone and my co-host, Laura Haynes. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.